The small bell above the door jingled softly as Ethan Carter stepped into his own grocery store, a place he had owned for 15 years, yet today felt strangely unfamiliar, as if he were stepping into a world he no longer belonged to. Dressed in a faded hoodie he'd pulled from the back of his closet, Ethan looked more like a drifter than the owner. A worn-out baseball cap was pulled low over his weary but sharp eyes, the eyes of a man searching for truth. No crisp button-down shirt, no tailored slacks. Today, he wasn't arriving as the boss. He was an anonymous observer, hoping to see what he'd missed. The familiar aroma of roasted coffee and fresh produce drifted through the air like an old greeting, but it brought no comfort. Morning sunlight streamed through the large front windows, casting long shadows across the polished floors. Everything on the surface looked normal, just another morning like so many before, but Ethan knew better than to trust appearances. Peace, he had learned, could be a mask hiding something darker underneath. The night before, he'd spent hours at his desk, buried in spreadsheets and receipts. His eyes blurred with exhaustion, but the numbers told a cold and undeniable story. Sales were holding steady, maybe even growing, but profits were quietly vanishing, like ice cream melting on a summer sidewalk. Something was wrong. Something was draining the lifeblood of what he had spent more than a decade building. "It's probably just the economy," his manager had told him the day before, wearing a practiced expression of concern. "Everyone's feeling the squeeze these days." But Ethan wasn't the type to settle for convenient excuses. He had started with a single shelf and a space barely bigger than a storage closet. Over the years, he'd grown it with his own hands and heart into more than just a store. It was a hub, a place of connection. Or at least it had been. Now it might be the backdrop for a betrayal he wasn't yet ready to name. Walking slowly through the aisles, Ethan watched his employees as an outsider might. Sarah, the veteran cashier of 5 years, was training a new hire on the register, her voice calm and patient. Mike, the quiet, well-liked employee, was restocking the cereal shelves, chatting easily with a regular customer. These were people he had trusted with his livelihood, attended their kids' birthday parties, celebrated their family graduations. The idea that someone among them might be stealing from him weighed on his chest like a stone. He moved aisle to aisle, fingers brushing the familiar wooden shelves where he had once walked proudly as the store's owner. Today he was a shadow of himself. A young mother passed by with a cart full of groceries, her toddler babbling happily in the seat. Ethan stepped aside, lowering his head to avoid eye contact. He recognized her, Mrs. Thompson, a regular who usually came in on Tuesday mornings. Would she recognize him in this disguise? His pulse quickened, but she passed without a second glance. The disguise worked. Yet the feeling of invisibility stung in a different, unexpected way. The security cameras hummed quietly overhead. They had once symbolized safety, now they felt like a joke. If someone was stealing from him, they had found a way around the system. And if that was true, then they were smart, careful. Near the front, Ethan stopped by the magazine rack, pretending to flip through an old issue while keeping the checkout lanes in view. The store was filling up, the familiar rhythm of beeping scanners and rustling bags rising like a morning symphony. But today, Ethan listened for a different melody, the sound of deceit. He thought back to what employees had told him over the years. "You're not like other bosses, Mr. Carter. You treat us like family." That sentiment now burned like acid. Had his greatest strength, his trust, actually been his biggest mistake? Ethan picked up a magazine, eyes scanning the page while his mind focused sharply on the world around him. Every move, every word, every transaction. He watched. Everything seemed a little too smooth, a little too perfect, and that, more than anything, made him wary. Years of business experience had taught him the devil rarely wore horns. It lived in the overlooked details. He was about to move to another section when something made the blood in his veins run cold. A conversation at the register, casual in tone but piercing in content. Ethan didn't turn. Instead, he flipped another page slowly, carefully. He listened harder, his senses narrowing. The world faded around him until all that remained was a voice. A voice that sliced deep into the trust he had built over 15 years. Through the gap in the candy display, Ethan saw Mike, his longtime employee, leaning over the register, the red vest slightly wrinkled. Across from him was Danny Martinez, a regular customer who always seemed to show up during Mike's shifts. The exchange began innocently. Danny laid down high-end products, premium coffee, organic meat, top-tier cleaning supplies, all among the store's most profitable items. Ethan's eyes narrowed as Mike scanned the items with practiced ease. But then, something shifted. Mike tapped on the touchscreen and for a split second, the total flashed. Over $120.00. But just as quickly, it disappeared. A new number replaced it. $78.50. It'll be $78.50, Mike said smoothly. Ethan felt his chest tighten. He hadn't imagined it. He saw the change. This wasn't a mistake. It was deliberate, Danny chuckled, pulling out his wallet. Man, these anti-inflation prices keep me coming back. Mike leaned in, lowering his voice, but in the morning quiet, Ethan heard every word. Special prices are for the right people. Old man Carter's too busy counting money in his office to check the system anyway. Ethan's fists clenched until his knuckles turned white. It wasn't the money. It was the tone. The casual disregard in Mike's voice. The flippant dismissal of the man who had once helped him pay for his mother's surgery. It was betrayal. Personal and cutting. Then Danny lowered his voice. My sister's moving next week. She's gonna need to stock up. Think you can get her the family price too? Mike glanced around, his eyes briefly passing over Ethan, still unrecognized, and nodded. Tell her to come during my shift. Tuesday or Thursday morning is best. The cameras in aisle 3 have been glitchy lately, if you know what I mean. He tapped the side of his nose with a knowing smirk. Ethan felt as if someone had punched him in the chest. This wasn't carelessness. This was a system. A network. Organized, refined, and executed right under his nose. And the camera in aisle 3? Yes. It had been reported faulty weeks ago. Now he knew why the maintenance request had mysteriously vanished from the system. But what hit harder than the theft itself was this. It wasn't that he trusted too much. It was that he chose not to see the signs. Because he wanted to believe. He wanted to believe in loyalty, in gratitude, in shared effort, in family. Now he understood. That belief had been weaponized against him. Danny exited the store with his discounted haul and a satisfied smile. Ethan didn't move. He stood silently by the gum rack, his heart pounding like a war drum. How many others had been given special treatment? How long had this been going on? The missing profits, the strange data entries. They all came together now, piece by piece, into a picture that turned his stomach. An elderly woman approached Mike's register. Ethan didn't recognize her. Mike stood straighter, his tone more formal. No shortcuts, no tricks. The transaction went through at full price, clean and proper. It was a contrast that said everything. They were selective, calculated. Not everyone got the deal. That's how they avoided suspicion. They maintained a layer of legitimacy on the surface while bleeding Ethan's business dry underneath. Then came Lisa Chin, the owner of a cafe just 3 blocks down, pushing a cart loaded with high-end baking ingredients. Ethan held his breath as the now familiar scene replayed like a film on loop. Quick fingers dancing across the touchscreen, silent glances exchanged between customer and cashier. And then, a total that was suspiciously low. You're the best, Mike, Lisa beamed as she gathered her bags. Other places charge twice as much for this stuff. Without you guys, I don't know how I'd keep my cafe running. Mike grinned, giving her a wink. Just keep those amazing pastries coming. And remember, keep it quiet. The boss never checks the system." That sentence, repeated like a mantra, stabbed Ethan in the chest. The boss never checks the system. A simple fact, now weaponized. A line they echoed as assurance to justify their wrongdoing. For years, Ethan believed trust built loyalty. That if he treated employees like family, they'd protect this store as their own. But he had been wrong. Painfully so. When another customer approached and pulled Mike away, Ethan slipped quietly from the area, making his way to the other checkout counters. He had to know, was this just an isolated incident or part of something much bigger? The sick feeling in his gut told him he already knew the answer, but his mind needed to see it confirmed. He didn't have to wait long. At other registers, the same choreography unfolded. Altered prices, selective discounts, and subtle nods exchanged between insiders. Every time Ethan witnessed one of these manipulated transactions, it felt like a fresh tear in his heart. Memories of celebrating employee birthdays, staying late on Christmas Eve to help them wrap gifts. Those moments now collapsed like ruins. What he once called community had become nothing more than a facade, covering up a sophisticated theft ring that he had trusted completely. Sunlight streamed through the storefront windows, catching the dust in the air and casting light on the invisible cracks spreading through his store. The casual banter, the friendly jokes between customers and staff, what once filled him with pride, now sounded like echoes of conspiracy and lies. His fingers twitched with the urge to pull out his phone and check the system logs immediately, but he held back. Any unusual activity from him could tip them off. He needed more evidence, had to see the full scope of the betrayal before he acted. One wrong move and the entire network would vanish underground, never to resurface. The store's intercom crackled to life with the usual morning announcement, snapping Ethan from his thoughts. He realized he'd been standing still too long. Moving naturally, he drifted toward the coffee aisle, close enough to observe, but far enough not to draw attention. It was peak morning rush. The store bustled with energy, and Ethan stayed still, silently noting every suspicious detail, every unusual behavior. Years in retail had taught him how to spot patterns. Now, every transaction with a hidden discount chipped away at what was left of his belief in this place. His store was no longer a community hub. It was a den of betrayal. Then came Julie, a night shift employee, arriving earlier than usual. Ethan's instincts flared. She clutched her purse tightly, heading straight to the break room, but paused briefly beside Mike. Ethan watched as something exchanged hands. A small slip of paper, barely noticeable, but he saw it. His eyes narrowed beneath his cap. Were they tracking the special transactions? Splitting the profits? It wasn't just a pattern anymore. It was a system. And then came the moment that froze his blood. Sarah, the person he trusted most, who had helped him design the store's inventory system, who had stayed up with him optimizing operations night after night, walked out of the break room. Her familiar ponytail swayed behind her as she approached Mike's register, coffee in hand. "Busy morning?" she said with a light chuckle. Ethan stood frozen. "Not Sarah. Please, not Sarah." "Busy?" Sarah asked again, leaning casually on the counter. From his vantage point, Ethan could see her face clearly. The same smile, the same brightness in her eyes. Everything he once believed was sincere. He thought he knew Sarah, thought she was loyal, dependable. But now, that familiar expression made it hard to breathe. Mike finished up with a customer and nodded. "Same as always. Oh, Mrs. Peterson got her special price on that big batch of organic coffee." Sarah laughed, a light, casual laugh that hit Ethan like a punch to the chest. "Just make sure not to do too many in a row," she said, voice lowered but clear in the stillness of the morning. "Too many overrides and the system gets suspicious. Be smart, Mike. The last thing we need is Ethan finding out. He trusts us too much." The way she said his name, so flippantly, without a trace of warmth or respect, turned Ethan's whole body cold. All the late nights, all the brainstorming sessions, they meant nothing. Sarah wasn't a trusted partner anymore. She was a stranger, calculated. As if that weren't enough, Tom from the stockroom walked up and joined the conversation. "Speaking of the boss," he said, "did you see him trying to review the security footage last week?" Sarah rolled her eyes and smirked. "Don't worry. I accidentally deleted the backups during the maintenance. Told him it was a glitch. He bought it, no questions asked." It was like a lightning bolt struck Ethan's mind. Suddenly, all the weird system failures, the missing backups, the phantom glitches, they weren't random. They were part of a plan, a cover-up, and it had been orchestrated by the very people he trusted most. His so-called family. A youthful voice cut through his spiraling thoughts. "Hey, Sarah," it was Jake, the new hire, barely out of high school. He approached sheepishly. "I've been meaning to ask. A few of my friends were wondering if they could get the special price too." Ethan held his breath. Would they bring him in too, or shut him out? Sarah's expression shifted. Her voice lowered into something serious but calculated. "Jake, that's not something you talk about out loud," she said firmly. Then, with a quick glance around, she added, "But since you asked, find me after your shift. I'll show you a few customer service techniques." No need to say it out loud. Everyone knew what she meant. It was a quiet invitation, carefully worded and deliberately vague. Their operation was expanding. Ethan felt his stomach churn. The store was becoming a living organism, and the deceit spreading inside was like a virus. Julie returned from the break room, now holding a clipboard. "Today's inventory sheets. Hey, Sarah," she said. "Need your sign-off on yesterday's adjustments. We had a bunch of damaged items to write off." Sarah smiled knowingly, not even bothering to read the numbers. "To make sure the report matches what we already submitted. We can't afford inconsistencies." Ethan watched her scribble her signature without even a glance. The way they worked, coordinated, efficient, and heartlessly precise, showed this wasn't new. This had been happening for months, maybe longer, and it was spreading like cancer through every part of the business he had built with sweat, sacrifice, and blind faith. But the most painful realization hit him then. It wasn't just that they had betrayed him, it was that the entire system had been rotting under his feet, and he hadn't seen it. He began watching the others, those outside the inner circle. Some avoided eye contact, slipping by quickly. Others shared subtle nods or half smiles with the conspirators, a silent language understood only by the initiated. This store, his pride, his dream, now wore two faces. One bright and welcoming, the one customers saw. The other, a hidden, moldy underbelly that Ethan was only now beginning to see. The morning sun no longer felt warm. Now it was like a harsh spotlight shining directly on a stage where the actors still played their parts. Smiling, greeting, pretending, and Ethan stood there, quietly asking himself the most haunting question of all. How much of it was ever real? Ethan stood there, quietly watching the solitary man in the empire he built, knowing that he was about to face a painful choice. Protect his legacy, or tear it down to rebuild from scratch. How much of what he had believed to be family was actually just a facade, a smokescreen for a well-organized scheme of exploitation? The thought weighed on him like lead, making his disguise feel hot and suffocating. But he couldn't walk away. He couldn't let emotion take over. He needed the whole truth, detailed, exact, before making any move. He owed himself that. He owed it to the store, his brainchild, raised with sweat and sacrifice. The morning dragged on, and the evidence piled up like a mountain. More employees arrived, each one sliding into this system of deceit with disturbing ease. Some actively participated, others turned a blind eye, pretending not to see. A hidden web of complicity was spreading, wider than Ethan had ever imagined. And then, the worst happened. As he moved past the kitchenware aisle, Ethan overheard Sarah on the phone behind the counter, somewhere she assumed no one could hear, but her voice carried clearly between the shelves. What he heard next shattered everything he thought he knew about his store, his staff, his so-called family. His heart pounding, Ethan retreated to the quietest corner of the store, near the pet supplies. He pulled out his phone, his fingers trembling as he opened the store's management app, the very system Sarah had once encouraged him to invest in, saying it would boost efficiency. Back then, he saw it as dedication. Now, he saw the truth. She had pushed for it to exploit it. Logging in, Ethan immediately noticed something strange, a sharp increase in price overrides during specific shifts. Unexplained discounts with no valid reason clustered around the shifts of Mike, Sarah, and their trusted inner circle. Ethan swiped through transaction after transaction. Every swipe felt like another blade cutting into him. Premium coffee, normally priced at $22.99, sold for $1.15. Organic meat worth nearly $45.00, rung up as $2.80. High-end household products, slashed 40% off with no active promotion. Worse still, some transactions showed items being voided and re-entered at drastically reduced prices, a tactic clearly designed to avoid triggering any red flags in the system. The precision and subtlety revealed one thing: this wasn't amateur theft. This was a coordinated plan created by someone who knew every weakness in the system, someone he had trusted implicitly. Switching to inventory records, Ethan felt his chest tighten. The store's best sellers, coffee, meat, household staples, showed stable sales volumes, but the profits weren't there. Some of the discounts didn't even appear on receipts. They had been disguised as spoilage or system errors. As he reviewed the data, a new alert popped up: inventory adjustment. 24 units of premium coffee, marked as damaged. Ethan's hands clenched, his knuckles turning white. He had just seen that same coffee sold at a special discount to a customer. There was nothing damaged about it. The only thing being destroyed was the store's profit, its integrity, and his trust. He dug deeper into historical records, and a chilling pattern emerged. Every month, like clockwork, large quantities of merchandise were marked as spoiled or damaged on the same days that sales peaked. What he had once written off as normal shrinkage was now clearly a cover-up. He opened the year-to-date financial summary. The truth hit him like a slap. His store wasn't just leaking money, it was hemorrhaging. Estimated losses over $50,000, 0 cents. And that was conservative, not even accounting for the hidden write-offs. Coffee profits had dropped 40% despite steady sales. The meat department looked even worse, deep in the red with no reasonable explanation. Ethan leaned against the shelf, his body trembling. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a few careless discounts. This was a crime, an organized criminal enterprise operating inside the very place he had once called family. Then his eyes landed on one final detail. The price override activity chart showed 2 time slots where manual discounts and suspicious entries were heavily concentrated. Tuesday and Thursday mornings, the exact times Mike had mentioned to Danny. Tell your sister to come in Tuesday or Thursday morning. The aisle 3 camera's been acting up. Sure enough, surveillance footage during those time blocks was either corrupted or completely missing. The system listed them as technical malfunctions. But now Ethan knew there were no malfunctions. Only a plan executed silently, precisely. His phone buzzed. An incoming email pulled him out of the data stream. It was from the store's system provider, confirming a change to next week's security update schedule. Ethan had never requested it. The sender, Sarah's company email. His heart sank. They weren't just stealing money. They were maintaining the conditions that allowed it to continue, scrubbing the evidence, creating safe windows for theft. There was no longer any doubt. Sarah wasn't just involved, she was the architect behind the entire scheme. Ethan opened the staff scheduling system, and everything clicked into place. Mike always worked with Julie, Sarah always overlapped with Tom. Their breaks were staggered perfectly to ensure someone from the inner circle was always near the registers, always watching. Suddenly another alert lit up. A price override at Register 3. Ethan looked up just in time to see a large transaction being processed. The total dropped by nearly $100.00 in a matter of seconds. The customer and cashier exchanged a knowing glance before the bags were handed over. His finger hovered over the flag suspicious activity button. One tap and the entire management team would be alerted. But he stopped himself. Not yet. If he acted now, they'd bury everything. Just like they had before. He needed something bigger, stronger. A full case, undeniable and airtight. He opened the Notes app and began methodically documenting everything. Transaction IDs, employee numbers, timestamps, names. Every note was a knife twisted deeper. But it had to be done. He was cataloging the disintegration of trust, one line at a time. Fake discounts, falsified inventory losses, manipulated schedules, deliberately corrupted logs. It wasn't just a scam, it was a machine. And now Ethan could finally see its gears. Then came the final, crushing realization. Tomorrow was payday. According to system protocol, transaction logs would be automatically purged to enhance performance. Sarah had personally recommended this feature during their last upgrade, assuring him it was a streamlined solution he didn't need to worry about. Now he understood. They had embedded their own digital eraser into the very foundation of his store. If he didn't act now, all this month's evidence would disappear. Again. And the cycle would repeat itself. Ethan sat silently, his chest tight with grief. This was no longer a matter of a few dishonest employees. This was a criminal operation unfolding within the very business he had built with everything he had. His trust, his relationships, his memories, his sweat, and his dreams. Tomorrow, he would confront it all. Not just the fraud, but the full force of betrayal. But tonight, he still had one night left to complete his case. And when the sun rose, Ethan Carter would return. Not as a man in disguise quietly searching for answers, but as the store owner, ready to seek justice. The next morning, the sky was crystal clear, sunlight pouring through the storefront windows in soft beams. It looked peaceful, but inside, Ethan, a storm raged. He no longer wore the hoodie or the baseball cap to conceal his identity. Today, he was back in his crisp button-down shirt, neat tie and tailored jacket. His posture was upright, his gaze sharp. At exactly 8 o'clock IME, Ethan Carter walked through the doors of his store. Inside, the staff bustled about their usual routines. Smiles, chatter, movement, just another morning. Until Sarah looked up from the register. She caught his eye. For a split second, her familiar smile appeared. But when she noticed the thick vanilla-colored folder in his hand, her expression faltered. "Good morning, Mr. Carter," Sarah called out, keeping her voice polite, though her eyes locked onto his with subtle unease. "You're in early today. Is something urgent?" Ethan stopped in the middle of the store, the place he once called home. He looked around at every face. People he had laughed with, people he had trusted, people he had once called family. Then, calmly and clearly, he answered, his words like the edge of a blade. "Yes, something very urgent. Staff meeting. Main office. 15 minutes. His voice cut through the morning noise like a knife. "Mike, Julie, Tom, Jake, I expect you there." He turned to Sarah, not breaking eye contact. "Sarah, please finish the register handoff and join us." He didn't miss the quick glance exchanged between Sarah and Mike, a flicker of tension rippling through the morning crew. They knew something was wrong. They just didn't know how wrong. In the office, Ethan laid out each document with methodical care. Transaction logs meticulously marked, screenshots of mysteriously glitched security footage, Inventory reports riddled with blatant contradictions. Each page was a crack in the foundation of trust he had once built with his whole heart. The staff entered, one by one, in silence. Sarah was the last. The click of the door closing behind her echoed like a final nail. They sat around the conference table, the same table where they'd once celebrated birthdays and holiday parties, made plans and shared laughter. Now it felt more like a courtroom, and Ethan sat at the head, holding the scales. "I've always believed," Ethan began, his voice calm but charged, "that trust is the foundation of any strong business, that if you treat your employees like family, they'll never turn on you." He paused, letting his gaze pass over each face, now void of the confidence they once wore. "Yesterday I learned the true value of that trust." Mike visibly paled as Ethan slid the first folder to the center of the table, a report showing steep discounts on premium coffee products. "Can anyone explain why our specialty coffee is being sold at a 40% discount to a select group of special customers?" Ethan asked. His tone didn't waver, but every word pierced like a needle. He pushed another report toward Sarah. "Or perhaps someone can help me understand why these items were logged as damaged, even though they were clearly sold at the register?" Sarah froze. Her face tightened as she recognized her own employee ID highlighted on the page. Julie fidgeted in her chair, visibly unsettled. Tom stared at the floor, as if hoping it might swallow him whole. "No one." Ethan's voice dropped lower, colder. "Then let me help you. I've gathered enough evidence to confirm that for months, possibly longer, you've been running an organized theft operation within this store. Unauthorized discounts, fake damage claims, manipulated shift schedules to avoid detection, tampering with camera footage, even embedding a monthly auto-delete protocol for transaction logs." He pulled out another stack of papers. "I'll give you this. Your operation was thorough and well-managed." Jake, the newest hire, looked sick. "Mr. Carter, Not yet," Ethan cut him off sharply. For the first time during the meeting, his voice rose. "I'm not finished." He stood, pressing both hands on the table, eyes burning into each one of them. "You didn't just steal money from me. You shattered what I built, what I believed in, the trust, the loyalty, the belief that this could be a workplace defined by honesty and care." No one spoke. No beeping scanners, no door chime. The entire store held its breath. "Sarah," Ethan turned to the woman he once considered his right hand, "you helped me design our security system. When you pushed for those updates, was it to protect the store or to create the exact holes you needed?" Sarah's face went pale. Her voice trembled. "I didn't think what, Sarah?" Ethan's voice cracked with fury. "Didn't think I'd find out? Or didn't think it was wrong? When this very store paid for your daughter's braces last year." He looked at Mike, eyes sharp and direct. "And you, Mike? I covered your mother's surgery costs. I never asked for anything back, just one thing, honesty." Mike's face flushed with a blend of shame and stubbornness. "We were just helping people," he mumbled. "Things are tough. Prices are crazy. This stuff is overpriced. Don't," Ethan's voice sliced the air, "don't justify theft with moral posturing. This isn't some noble act. This is betrayal." He lifted the final folder, his voice dropping into something colder than anger. "Or should we talk about the damaged inventory that somehow found its way into your trunks after closing time?" The room went silent again. Every person at the table knew they had been exposed. And now, justice was about to begin. The atmosphere in the meeting room was thick with tension. Ethan continued laying out folder after folder, security camera stills, transaction log excerpts, manipulated inventory records. Each piece of evidence struck at the core of their self-hidden, stripping away the moral masks they had worn for so long. These weren't just numbers on a page. They were manifestations of lies, of betrayed relationships, of trust ground into dust. Finally, Ethan placed one last folder on the table, blank, yet more terrifying than all the rest. It was a police report form. He looked around the room, his voice dropping low but landing heavy as iron. "So, who wants to go first?" The room fell utterly silent. 5 pairs of eyes stared at the empty form, each of them understanding that what they said next could determine not only their careers, but the course of their entire futures. The house of lies they had built was collapsing, brick by brick. Now they had one choice left: face it or flee from it. A few seconds passed, then a choked sob shattered the silence. Jake, the youngest, still barely starting out, broke down. "I only did it twice," he stammered, tears spilling. "Sarah showed me. She said everyone did it just to help out friends." His confession sparked a chain reaction. Julie spoke next, her voice shaking but clear. "At first it was just a few times helping out regulars who were struggling, but it kept going. The lines started to blur. I never touched the inventory system, but I knew and I said nothing." Ethan listened, his heart conflicted. These people had once felt like family. Now, one by one, they were peeling back the layers of deceit. Some broke down. Others still clung to denial. Tom sat silently, arms folded tightly, his expression hard as stone. No words, no hint of remorse. Then Sarah spoke, the woman who had helped Ethan design the very systems they were now dismantling. Her voice was quiet, almost a whisper. "We never thought of it as stealing. These were our neighbors, our friends. Prices kept rising. We just wanted to help, but we went too far." She couldn't even lift her eyes by the end. Mike, as always, held fast to his illusion of righteousness. "You're making millions while people can barely afford food," he snapped. "We were just leveling the playing field." Ethan rose from his chair. He walked to his desk, pulled out a stack of envelopes and returned to the table. His voice was firm, measured, and final. "I've made my decisions. This is not up for debate. These are the consequences." He turned to Jake, his tone softening. "You're young. You were led astray. 2-week suspension. Mandatory ethics training. You'll work under direct supervision for 6 months. One more misstep, and you're done." Jake's face flushed with a mix of relief and guilt. He nodded through tears. "Julie," Ethan continued, "you knew better, but you came forward. 1 month suspension, then probation. You'll help implement the new security protocols." Then he looked down at the last 2 envelopes. "Tom, Mike, clear out your lockers. Security will escort you off the premises. Your final paychecks will reflect deductions for verified damages." Tom bit his lip but said nothing. Mike stared daggers but didn't argue. The evidence was overwhelming. Finally, Ethan turned to Sarah. Between them stood a long history, years of collaboration, shared burdens, family dinners. "You designed this system. You knew exactly how it worked and used that knowledge to exploit it," Ethan said, every word weighed with sorrow and certainty. "I'm not just firing you, I'm pressing charges." Sarah's face went pale. "Ethan, please." "Don't." "This isn't just a workplace issue," he cut her off. "You'll be hearing from my attorney." As security arrived to escort the terminated employees out, Ethan turned to the rest of his staff. Their faces were pale but no longer filled with doubt, only quiet understanding and waiting. He took a deep breath. "We can't erase what happened," he said, "but we can start again. Starting tomorrow," Ethan said, voice calm but resolute. "We roll out the new system." All eyes turned to him, not with suspicion or fear, but cautious hope. Every transaction will be recorded and reviewed. Random audits will be standard. Camera systems will be upgraded. Access to the management software will be strictly limited. He paused, his eyes resting briefly on Jake, then Julie, then the new hires. "But more important than what we monitor with machines or track in spreadsheets is something we used to have and lost." He lowered his voice. "Trust. We will rebuild it. step by step. Not everyone will be trusted like before. Some of you will need to prove you deserve it. Others will have to relearn how to earn it. As the room emptied, Ethan remained seated, sunlight casting long lines across his desk, where the store's first dollar still hung framed on the wall, a symbol of simpler times, when trust was easier to give and harder to lose. Now he sat surrounded by paperwork, but the real weight he carried was invisible, the quiet ache of something sacred, broken. That afternoon, as he walked the familiar aisles, Ethan noticed something different in the air. It no longer smelled like deceit. The tension was still there, but somehow cleaner. There were whispers, sideways glances. Some faces looked ashamed. Others seemed relieved, as if a silent burden had been lifted. The store wasn't the same, but maybe that was a necessary change. In the weeks that followed, the store entered a period of transformation. New systems were installed, policies rewritten, training became routine. But the biggest change was cultural. Gone was the false sense of family that once cloaked betrayal. In its place, clarity, accountability, and slowly, honesty. Some customers complained when the special prices disappeared. But when Ethan explained the new zero-tolerance policy, most understood. More than understood. They supported him. A few walked away, but the ones who stayed, they were the ones who truly mattered. Profits dipped at first, but month by month, the numbers began to climb again, gradually, steadily. 6 months later, Ethan stood in his office, reviewing the latest financial report. Finally, the numbers made sense. Jake had proven himself reliable and honest under supervision. Julie was not only back, but had become an advocate for integrity. The new employees, hired through stricter screening, were settling in well. From the front windows, Ethan looked out at the community he'd served for over a decade. Everything looked the same, but something inside him had changed forever. The trust he once gave so easily had become something precious, something that had to be earned, safeguarded, and rebuilt each day. He knew now that betrayal leaves scars that never fully heal. They become reminders of lessons learned the hard way. His store would survive, it would thrive again, but not on goodwill alone, on vigilance, structure, and most of all, honesty, because trust once lost can't be assumed. It must be built through truth, through action, and by people willing to change.